Hey folks, today we're taking a look at a 1984 Jaguar XJ-S HE. This car has been sitting untouched for over 2 decades in what's essentially an open-air environment. One side window hasn't been fully closed, and it's been exposed to the elements all this time. A lot of people wonder why starting old cars abroad seems so easy. Well, today we're diving into one of the tougher cases. This Jaguar shows visible wear and tear, with scratches on the body and some dents near the rear wheel. The owner found it on a second-hand website and had to spend a week getting it back into somewhat presentable condition. Let's first check out the exterior. The left front side has a small damaged spot. Cars like this generally don't cost much, probably just a few £100s when converted. The seller mentioned it was listed on an auction platform, and he jumped in without hesitation. Unfortunately, he didn't disclose the exact price he paid. The chrome bumpers are rusted, and the right side of the body, being near the edge of a shed, shows damage from rain exposure. The car still has an inspection sticker on the windshield, but the details don't line up exactly with how long it's been sitting. Based on visual evidence and corroboration from the owner, it seems to have been parked for a very long time. Now let's open the door and take a peek inside. The window not being fully shut left a significant gap. Keep in mind this is a British car, so the driver's seat is on the right. The interior is surprisingly not as bad as expected. Dusty, sure, but not completely trashed. However, one major concern was the possibility of rodents. The passenger side is especially vulnerable, and as it turns out, there were signs of mice activity. This Jaguar is different from the simpler American classics we've seen before. By this model year, Jaguars were integrating more electronic systems. For instance, the parking brake is located on the right side of the driver, which can make getting in and out a bit awkward. It's a purely mechanical handbrake, unlike modern electronic ones, which some might find more convenient. But the placement here can interfere with your movement as you exit the car. Now about the engine, it's a 5.3-liter V12. And yes, you heard that right. This Jaguar was among the first production cars to feature a V12 engine. While other high-performance cars with V12 engines existed before, most were limited production supercars. What sets this apart is that Jaguar made the V12 available on a mass-produced vehicle. Opening the hood reveals a cramped engine bay, fully packed with components. Unlike the simpler four-cylinder engines of the same era, this is a complex machine with plenty of electronics that make repairs far trickier. It's clear that cars from the 80s are a different beast compared to those from the 70s. The reliance on electronics in these models means they demand more attention and expertise to restore. And yes, when the hood was opened, there was indeed a mouse scurrying away, confirming the suspicions. It's always a gamble with a car that's been left untouched for this long, but that's part of the excitement of working with classics like this one. When reviving an old car that's been sitting idle for years, one of the first steps is to check the condition of the fluids and hoses. The discovery of mice in or around the vehicle raises some concerns, specifically whether they've chewed through fuel lines, wiring, or other components. For this Jaguar, the brake fluid system appears intact, as the reservoir still has fluid. If there had been a leak, the fluid would have drained out long ago. That's a positive sign, but it doesn't eliminate the need to inspect other critical systems for damage. Starting with the brake fluid reservoir, you can see there's still fluid inside. Next, attention turns to the transmission fluid, radiator coolant, and engine oil, each of which needs to be checked individually. Alongside the brake fluid reservoir is a red handle that can be pulled to enable further diagnostics. On the other side of the engine bay, a plastic coolant tank reveals a blue fluid line, indicating that coolant is present and the tank is not completely dry. For the transmission fluid, while manufacturers often advertise lifetime fluids, the reality is quite different. Many older vehicles, particularly those with over 60,000 miles on the odometer, often benefit from a transmission fluid change. In some cases, even modern cars need their fluids replaced sooner than expected. Whether or not to change the fluid depends on the condition of the vehicle, but it's always a good idea to inspect it when dealing with a car that has been out of use for years. After verifying that the coolant tank was fine, the focus shifted to the engine oil. Using the dipstick, it was confirmed that the engine still had oil and no obvious issues were detected. However, to be thorough, the oil pan's drain plug could be loosened slightly to release a small sample. This would help check for water contamination or excess debris in the oil, which could signal deeper problems. Fortunately, based on the dipstick inspection, everything seemed normal. The next step was installing a new battery. The previous battery had been removed long ago, which is common for cars that have been stored for extended periods. After replacing it, the interior lights illuminated, confirming that parts of the electrical system were operational. Turning the ignition key caused the dashboard warning lights to come on, providing further evidence that the electrical components were still functional. However, there was an issue. The fuel pump didn't respond. This is a common problem with older vehicles, particularly those left idle for extended periods. To address this, a temporary auxiliary fuel pump was installed, along with a makeshift fuel line connected directly to the engine. This setup bypassed the vehicle's main fuel pump and allowed fuel to reach the engine. Additionally, starter fluid was sprayed into the engine to assist with ignition. The first attempt to start the car was time-consuming. While parts of the process were condensed for the sake of presentation, it was clear that this wasn't going to be a straightforward startup. Further investigation pointed to a faulty ballast resistor. This critical component is responsible for managing both the fuel pump and the fuel injectors. Without it functioning properly, the fuel system couldn't operate as intended, preventing the car from starting. Despite all the effort, replacing the battery, verifying the fluids, bypassing the fuel pump, and using starter fluid, the car remained unresponsive. It's not uncommon for older vehicles like this to present unique challenges, especially with age-related wear and tear on electronic components. While it's disappointing that the car didn't start, this situation highlights the intricate process of diagnosing and addressing the many issues that can arise with a classic car restoration project. The process of getting this car to start was far from easy. It took a long time before it showed even the slightest signs of life, but it still wouldn't fully start. Things didn't go as planned, and as daylight faded, the owner realized it would take 5 or 6 hours to get the car back home. Ultimately, he decided to tow it instead of trying to drive it. Once home, he continued troubleshooting in the garage. Initially, he hoped to drive the car onto the trailer, but issues with the electrical system made that impossible. He replaced the ballast resistor with a new one, expecting it to resolve the problem. After getting the car home, he began inspecting the electrical system and the fuel injectors to see if they were functioning correctly. However, even after installing the new ballast resistor, the car wouldn't start. Suspecting the ECU could also be faulty, he replaced it as well. Still, the problem persisted. The initial issue seemed to be related to the ballast resistor, which wasn't operating properly and caused the fuel injectors to malfunction. Instead of conducting his own detailed checks from the start, the owner relied on online advice, which led to several time-consuming steps. When he first got the car, he only had a few hours before dark and managed to pull out the spark plugs for a quick look. They seemed fine at a glance, but the car wouldn't start. It was only later that he realized he needed to check the spark plugs thoroughly, along with the fuel injectors and wiring, to identify the root cause. Through trial and error, he discovered that 6 of the 12 fuel injectors on the V12 engine were working, while the other 6 weren't. The issue turned out to be the new ballast resistor. The original resistor was a dual output type, while the replacement was single output, which meant one side of the injectors wasn't receiving power. Without power to all the injectors, the engine couldn't run. After further inspection, he confirmed that the new ballast resistor wasn't adequate for the job. After many days of troubleshooting and replacing various components, the car finally started and ran successfully for the first time in over 2 decades. Although the problem stemmed from a small electrical component, the preparation and repairs, including addressing the spark plugs, fuel injectors, and fuel pump, were critical. This experience highlights the challenges of working on classic cars, where outdated systems and a lack of familiarity with older technology can make even small issues difficult to diagnose and fix. In the end, the 21-year-old classic roared to life, proving that persistence pays off. Thank you for watching this journey of restoration and repair. See you in the next episode.